Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm In-jung Cho. The U.S. Treasury expressed concerns that Moscow might provide military assistance to Pyongyang's WMD program as part of the ongoing military cooperation. President Yoon Suk-yeol said that South Korea going nuclear is not a realistic option, but it will not take long if Seoul chooses to do so. Today, we've discussed the security dynamics in Northeast Asia.
And we believe that these kinds of actions and activities are deeply concerning and destabilizing.
Cease its unlawful procurement of arms and material from the DPRK and meet its responsibilities as a member of this council.
In the studio with me, Mr. Dennis Wilder, professor at Georgetown University. Mr. Wilder was a senior director for East Asian Affairs at the National Security Council during the George W. Bush administration. Mr. Wilder was CIA's deputy assistant director for East Asia and the Pacific. Also joining us, Ms. Mary Beth Long is Distinguished Fellow at the Wilson Center. Ms. Long served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs and Chairman of NATO's High-Level Group on Nuclear Issues. Ms. Long was an Operations Officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. Welcome to the program.
Thanks very much.
Now, Ms. Long, in the proliferation financing risk assessment, the Treasury Department stated that U.S. is concerned that in exchange for military equipment and munitions, that Moscow will provide military assistance to Pyongyang to expand its WMD programs. Based on your experience as Assistant Secretary of Defense, do you think that Russia may indeed give sophisticated technology that may change the military balance of power in the region? There were initial skepticism as there was no precedent for Russia to give classified information to other countries.
I think that really the jury is out. Certainly, it's possible that Russia gave sophisticated and even a significant advance, a technology incremental advancement for North Korea. What I don't think is it gave it something that's going to change the balance of power. It's President Putin, I'm sure, weighed the risks of going too far with sticking his nose into the Chinese backyard with his relationship with Kim Jong-un. I'm sure that Kim Jong-un asked for something significant, and I would bet that whatever he did get, we're going to be unhappy with. But that's different than going to the level of changing the balance of power and impacting China's influence in that region, with Russia, basically working with North Korea. I think it's going to be bad, frankly. I hope that it's not, but I don't think it changes the balance of power.
Professor Wilder, former U.S. sanctions official, was on Washington Talk, and he said he didn't see anything significant from the Biden administration to stop this trade between North Korea and Russia, that we didn't see any significant explosion of trains full of weapons or planes not making it to the destination. Now, you were with the CIA as Deputy Assistant Director and White House NSA's Senior Director, and you must be well aware of covert operations because this official said that we should take note of Reagan administration's covert program to stop Soviet arms transfers. Do you think the U.S. should interdict and block and even sabotage these trades between North Korea and Russia? Do you think the U.S. has the willingness and capability to do so?
Well, American presidents do have a large toolbox to use in foreign policy. You've heard some of the ideas on the military side here. Covert action by the CIA is a very real tool that presidents have used to block weapons of mass destruction proliferation. We've actually had many successes, which I can't tell you about. In terms of this particular case, and with all due respect to your former guests on the program, the idea that we're going to blow up trains moving through Russia is a pretty big risk to take. And presidents always on covert action have to balance the risk versus the benefits. Right now, the artillery that the North Koreans are providing the Russians, frankly, will not change the outcome of the Ukraine war. Neither will the low-performance missiles that the North Koreans are providing. After all, the Russians have fired tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million rounds of artillery. It has not done anything to the Ukrainian defenses. Similarly, the missile strikes of the Russians have not caused the morale of the Ukrainian people to drop. So the idea that somehow we should do this, I think, is far-fetched. We do not want to start a war with the Russians or with the North Koreans, and going on their territory to do some of covert at that level, I think is very irresponsible. Now, do we work to stop North Korean weapons of mass destruction proliferation or biological or chemical from countries? Absolutely. And we have a very active counter-proliferation center at the intelligence community. We do covert action, as I said before, many successes, some known, many unknown. And we do operate against the North Koreans. But it would be irresponsible of me to tell you anything about that.
Well, point taken. Western countries' support for Ukraine has slowed down somewhat. And do you think this is a good time for South Korea to step in and provide some lethal weapons to Ukraine? South Korea has large stocks of ammunition and conventional weapons.
Well, let's be careful about the slowing of aid to Ukraine. The Europeans have not slowed their aid to the Ukrainians. We have a problem in the United States Congress right now with aid to the Ukrainians, but there's been a huge amount of American assistance to the Ukrainians. Nonetheless, the more we can get the democracies of the world involved, the more we can get more allies involved. We do have a shortage of ammunition. We have difficulty, the Europeans and ourselves, providing enough ammunition for artillery. So the South Koreans can make a difference in this case, and I think they should.
Ms. Long, Russian ambassador to North Korea, Matsugora, warned a potential conflict on the Korean Peninsula and North Korea's potential 7th nuclear test all depends on U.S.'s action. Now, he's essentially being a spokesperson for North Korea. Do you think Russia's patronage to North Korea will continue only as long as Ukraine war continues? Or do you think the Russia-North Korea nexus with loose affiliation with China, that arrangement is there to stay? How does that alignment between the three countries become an obstacle to U.S.'s strategy, global strategy?
Well, I think there's actually a couple of questions that are in there. I'm going to break it down just a little bit. I would hesitate to say that what Putin did for North Korea is patronage. I think if Putin were to describe it today, and I'm not speaking for him, but it was sort of a tactical move. I don't see any long-term commitment. Maybe there is. Certainly the Chinese would want to know about that. I don't think Putin has the wherewithal, frankly. He's got a lot going on in his own neck of the woods. I don't think he's going to involve himself in China's backyard. There are a lot of consequences to that, not only involving the U.S. and the alliance with the South Koreans, but China looking over. So I'm unclear as to whether the coincidence of interests that were demonstrated between the North Koreans and the Russians goes much further than that. I'm sure there'll be back and forth, but I don't see an alliance. I don't see patronage. I see both countries taking advantage of a situation. And that may linger for quite some time. What does that mean? I think as far as the U.S. posture, I think we need to be more aware of Putin always seems to surprise us in his ability and proclivity to put his finger in and make a situation worse. He loves to distract the United States. He loves to be provocative. He loves to appear to take tactical moves, making strategic consequences where the risk versus gain, everybody has to go back and recalculate. And I think what the U.S. is doing right now is recalculating. What does this mean? What kind of relationship is it? What kind of help was it? How does China feel about it? Do we have a coincidence of interest with China in that we both want a limited Russian involvement? I mean, at the end of the day, China's playing a very long game. That's their neck of the woods. Russia, I think, is playing a short game in the region, and one that's perilous because it doesn't really have any natural allies other than North Korea. And if that's your only ally or your only partner at the time, you may want to tread carefully.
Ms. Long, is China currently facing a dilemma? On the one hand, North Korea-Russia nexus may divert U.S. attention from Northeast Asia to Europe. On the other hand, North Korea providing weapons to Russia may start arms race in the region and then also create instability in the region. So between these two, what's more important for China?
I think China is in a little bit of a wait-and-see posture at this moment. On the one hand, anything that distracts the Americans, anything that diminishes American capability or that diminishes Americans' will or the practical complications that would limit America's response to President Xi making assault against Taiwan, anything that moves the meter in that direction, I think Xi is willing to support and watch it play out, particularly to the extent that he's not involved and it doesn't have any severe impact on his interests. So if this is deteriorating American capability and complicating their lives, I think he's happy to have it. I think there's a line, however, in which at what point does this slop over into, as you point out, the rest of the region becoming nervous enough that it is starting to elevate concerns about, do we need our own nuclear weapons? Do we need alternatives, even perhaps to the U.S., because we've now got another player who is or isn't involved in hegemonic behavior in our region, the Russians. I think at this point, China's in a wait and see. I do think it's an opportunity, frankly, for the U.S. and for Japan and for Korea and others to basically draw the line and make it clear if this is the trajectory that the region is on, then they will have to increase defense spending and they will have to build capabilities and they will have to look at alternatives to the U.S. and they will basically arm themselves. And that, I think, will cause China some anxiety.
Professor Wilder, former Chinese President Jiang Zemin was instrumental in persuading North Korea to join the six-party talks in 2003. Former President Hu Jintao was instrumental in persuading North Korea return to the six-party talks in 2006 after its first nuclear test. 20 years later, is President Xi Jinping, is his solution completely different? And as U.S. requests, do you think Xi Jinping would play a constructive role in solving the North Korea issue?
Well, of course, I was involved in the six-party process. I was with President Bush in his discussions with both Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. They were very different on the North Korean issue. They had a sincere desire to see North Korean denuclearization. They were not comfortable with what the North Koreans were doing. Unfortunately, as Ms. Long has talked about a bit, Xi Jinping is a totally different Chinese leader. Xi Jinping, as we have seen in the South China Sea, opposite Taiwan, and other activities, is an aggressive Chinese leader and wants primacy in the Pacific region, wants us pulled back from the region, and is very uncomfortable with our alliance relationships in the region. Now, what I think we are seeing in terms of Xi Jinping is a man who believes that having a dangerous North Korea is in his interest. Not a North Korea going to war at this point, but a North Korea that is a threat. Because if he decides he must invade Taiwan or use military force against Taiwan, he doesn't mind having a large portion of American forces tied down in the peninsula. The danger of a two-front conflict for us is great. It would make a contingency related to Taiwan much more difficult if Kim were to be taking actions on the peninsula. But there's another part of this story, and Ms. Long alluded to this, and that is this is a strategic blunder on the part of Xi Jinping, because having a dangerous North Korea changes the balance in Northeast Asia, changes the calculation of Japan and South Korea, and could lead to a nuclear arms race.
So, Professor Wilder, is Xi Jinping taking advantage of North Korea then? You just talked about how in Taiwan contingency, North Korea, if attacks South Korea, that's advantageous. And also in the Russian case, China not getting its hands dirty. North Korea is providing weapons to Russia. So is Xi Jinping now taking advantage of North Korea, Kim Jong-un?
In a sense, I think Xi Jinping is very happy that he doesn't have the pressure from the Russians to provide artillery, which would complicate his relations not only with us, but the Europeans. But the danger of what he is doing with the North Koreans is very real. Remember that the North Koreans, when they attacked South Korea, ended the Chinese in a war, in the Korean War, where over 1 million Chinese lost their lives. The danger he's running is if Kim decides to create a conflict in Northeast Asia, China would have to decide what it would have to do.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Wilder, fundamentally, you said Xi Jinping doesn't mind North Korea being dangerous in the region, but when it comes to denuclearization of North Korea, is that more beneficial to him, or North Korea being an intractable problem for US and South Korea? What's more beneficial to him?
As an intractable problem, that is very important to the Chinese. They, at this point, under Xi Jinping, are not as concerned about him having a nuclear weapon. Frankly, I think they think that's an inevitability, that they have no way to stop him, and therefore they have to live with that particular part of the danger of North Korea.
You just told us about how China wants to keep North Korea dangerous, but how does that not go against China's long-term strategy of wanting to keep regional peace in the region? How should US draw up policies against that?
Well, this is why I said earlier that China's making a strategic miscalculation. Tactically, this may be, from the Chinese point of view, sensible, but strategically, it's a blunder. Just as Chinese support for Putin in the Ukraine is a blunder. The problem with the Chinese today is that they see the world in a manner in which there are blocks. There is the American bloc, like-minded countries, and then there is the bloc of these nations, the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, and others, who are trying to counter the American world order, want to reshape it. But I think he's making a big mistake for the Chinese people and the Chinese nation because he's aligning himself with the losers, frankly, in the international situation.
Mm-hmm. So, Ms. Long, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said in an interview that going nuclear is not realistic because South Korea will face sanctions. Now, it's hard to find anyone in Washington who would endorse South Korea developing their own nuclear weapons, but some of the panels on Washington Talk did note that this is a sovereign decision and something that cannot be completely ruled out. Now, there are some uncertainties surrounding who the next president will be, and there is a chance that President Trump could have a second term, and Asian allies are now out to boost up their military prowess. Now, the former Trump White House National Security Advisor O'Brien also told a Korean media that U.S. versus Korea's configuration could be adjusted. So given the rapidly changing security situation and political changes in the United States, do you think there's any chance that Washington's position on South Korea going nuclear may change in the future?
Honestly, absolutely. I think there's a chance it could change in the future. And part of that is, number one, if I were living in South Korea today and I were a South Korean citizen, I would certainly want the best military, the best capability that I could possibly have to protect me. And I would have a question as to what happens with my military allies if they're all distracted or whatever? I think that's a natural question. I do think that the alliance that we have with South Korea, the nuclear deterrence that we have with South Korea, the commitment that the U.S. has and others is plenty strong enough to take the necessity of their own nuclear weapon off the table. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure that the population feels that way. You have to provide assurances in not just a military way, but people need to know that this is going to work. This is how we're doing everything we can. This is how we're going to react. And we're doing that, of course, as you know, through the consultative committee, really working through what happens, who does what are contingency plans, et cetera.
And Professor Wilder, President Yoon Suk-yeol did reaffirm his commitment to the non-proliferation regime, but he at the same time said that it will not take long if Seoul decides to go nuclear, given South Korea's scientific and technological capabilities. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said last year that it will only take 5 years for Japan to make a nuclear weapon. Now, given that many countries around South Korea are going nuclear, do you think there's a chance that South Korea may eventually build its own nuclear weapons? In a recent survey this week, 61% of the South Koreans said that U.S. will not demonstrate nuclear deterrence on the Korean Peninsula under the threat of an ICBM attack on U.S. mainland.
I answer that in two ways. Number one, I think the Biden administration has done an excellent job of reassuring our allies of the extended deterrent. And they've taken physical steps, such as moving a ballistic missile submarine into Korean waters and other indicators of communicating with the South Koreans and the Japanese that if there is a nuclear contingency, we are there for them. I think, though, we have to admit that if there is a Trump presidency, President Trump, in his last term of office, was not as strong on these issues. He didn't speak up as strongly about the extended deterrence and these kinds of issues. And so if I were a South Korean, I'd be worried about that situation. And I could see that there could be new pressures on the government in South Korea to reconsider the decision on nuclear weapons. I hear this argument, though, all the time that somehow if the North Koreans have an ICBM, we will be deterred. I think you have to remember we've been living under the threat of ICBMs from the Soviet Union ever since the Cuban Missile era. We have been living under the threat of Chinese ICBMs for almost as long. The United States is not threatened in a way that changes our policy by countries having ICBMs. So I think this is a red herring, frankly. I think America will live up to its commitments. I think we have said, if you look at the nuclear posture review, it's very clear. We've said if North Korea uses a nuclear weapon, we will annihilate the government of North Korea. That is a very definite statement by the United States, and it should be taken seriously.
Very crystal clear. Ms. Long, Professor Wilder, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.